My name is Daniel Quigley. I started fighting fires officially in 1998. In the years prior to that, going back to when I was as young as 8, I would help my father load and unload supplies from the Clearwater Zone Office to the various fire camps and staging areas in the Clearwater Forest District. Somewhere in the North Adams, and I'm thinking that I was about 12 years old at this point, a fire had chased the fire crews off. So we ended up helping them load this burned up material onto the truck. And as we were doing that, one of the firefighters kind of reaches down and gives my hair the old tussle, hey? And I must have looked ridiculously starstruck. All I could think of was, I want to be just like him. That's what I want to do when I grow up. I want to be a firefighter. A little later, I started a logging company. And in 2000, I was awarded a standing offer to supply Type 2 fire crews to the province of British Columbia. It was in 2003 that I really noticed how the protection branch of the Ministry of Forests really didn't like us contractors. At the peak of that season, we were told to stand down for nearly 2 weeks while the McClure fire ravaged Barrier. Meanwhile, what is now BCWS amassed an army of out-of-province crews. The following year, a fire broke out right on the outer limits of our town, Clearwater. Our crews weren't invited. No locals were. Everyone who attended was from out of town and didn't get there till the next day or later days. Each time locals were overlooked and BCWS brought in crews from elsewhere, we were told we couldn't be used because we didn't have the required special training. We had to have a Type 1 status. But when we asked how we could achieve such status, we were told that it wasn't achievable. That was a status reserved only for BCWS internal staff. But apparently, that status was offered to their out-of-province partners and to other staff members in the ministry, staffers who may or may not have had fire experience. In the wake of this year's deadly fire season, those very same complaints echoed out from communities like Monty Lake, where residents lost homes and suffered devastating losses, while local resources were left unused. Now, I'm not one to accept conspiracy theories, but there appears to be a very consistent pattern here, stringing out for 20 years or more. And with trends indicating an increase in the severity of wildfire conditions over the coming years, this apparent pattern is highly concerning. I thought it'd be worth my time to speak to people who had personal experiences with wildfire in British Columbia. One of those is now the electoral area director of the Bulkley-Nechako Regional District, Clint Lambert. In 2018, Clint and a group of over 100 locals who lived on the south shore of Francois Lake, near Burns Lake, British Columbia, decided to take things into their own hands and fight a fire that was threatening their homes. They recognized that BCWS was outgunned, and they knew that they had the knowledge and resources to lend a helping hand. The response they received from BCWS, however, was not what they expected. Clint has joined me today to talk about that experience. Clint, I am stoked to have you on the show. We've had a few discussions already about those fires in 2018, and I find the story fascinating. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
What were your initial reactions to hearing about the Nadina and Verdun fires? Were you concerned at all?
No, I remember the night that they started. We saw that there was a glow up on the hill there, and we actually got in the pickup and drove up till we got to the place, and we could see the fire was only, I don't know, half a click or 3/4 of a click away. And there was a whole bunch of us. There was probably 10 vehicles sitting there, and we all just sat around talking. We're like, oh yeah, blah blah blah. Didn't have any worries in the world. We thought, oh yeah, BCWS will be here and they'll put the fire out, and there won't be any issue type thing. But didn't quite work that way.
Yeah. What was your early impressions of BCWS response?
A little bit surprised of the lack of response. Like I understand there was 600 fires burning in the province at that time, but was very surprised that there was uncontested for I don't know how long, until it was just about on our doorstep. And then they put together a bunch of local people with cats and equipment, and there was a big fire event or wind event that day, and it blew through, and they had to scramble and get the equipment to a gravel pit. But they still ended up losing one piece of equipment as the fire went over top of the gravel pit.
Which day was that? Do you remember the date?
I don't remember. It would have been early in August,
right?
And after that, BCWS basically didn't do a response on the Nadina. They were kind of in shambles. There was rumors that the incident commander, the guy that was the red shirt over it, it spooked him and he left. He didn't come back.
Right.
So that's when I think it was only a day or so after that the community took it upon themselves to start to get organized and move equipment into strategic places and start building guards, and started to get ready for the fire that was coming.
How did that decision come about? Was it a buildup of people, talking about going at it kind of cowboy? How did that initiate?
Pretty much just the neighbor come down and said, hey, we need to do something here. It's going to be on our doorstep in no time. So I started phoning other neighbors and other people that had equipment, and just started assembling things from there. And our group was on the north side of the ridge, in between Francois and Utsa Lake, Francois and Utsa. And there was another group of farmers and loggers on the south side of the ridge.
So you guys took it upon yourselves to take action. Can you maybe describe the tactics that you were using, how you came up with your plans, and how you communicated those? Was there sort of a central command, somebody, group of you guys that were making the decisions at that point?
Yeah, there was two of us on our side. We allowed, we didn't make any decisions for the guys on the south side of the ridge. That was their side, so they take care of that, and a guy named Wolfram Hummel and I took care of the stuff on the north side of the ridge.
Hence the name Wolfpack, is that right?
I'm guessing that's where the forestry came up with their name for us, I guess.
That was their nickname for you, was the Wolfpack.
That's correct, yeah.
Gotcha. So at some point you were issued an evacuation order. Could you tell us how that came about? What do you understand of the significance of evacuation orders?
Didn't really do anything other than mess us up. We didn't pay any attention to the evacuation order. We just kept doing what we knew we needed to do to save our community. So the only thing the evacuation order did was put police in strategic positions so that we couldn't go in or out or get parts or supplies, and then made it a lot riskier for us. Like we found a D8 cat, and to access that cat, I took two guys in two pickups ahead of me, and I drove the low bed, and we actually drove through the fire to get to the cat, loaded the cat on the low bed, and then drove back through the fire to get back. I had the two guys in the vehicles to cut trees off of the road so that we could get in and out without any troubles.
Yeah. and being essentially cut off from supplies, you were, again handcuffed by the BCWS. The incident commander was Peter Lang. Did you ever meet with him in person?
We did, yeah. We met with him. I'm trying to remember. I believe it was August 20th. We'd already been fighting the fire for 2 weeks or more by that point, and he'd already had a public meeting inside an evacuation order. He said that's the first time that BCWS has ever done that. That there was so many people that stayed behind that they actually had a public meeting inside of a evacuation order. So we met, myself, Wolfram, and Ken Nielsen met with them, and it was just the three of us and about 3 or 4 of them. We had the ignition specialist, we had Pete Lang, and we had one other guy or 2 other guys. I don't remember what their titles were, who they were. But
did you get the sense that they were trying to threaten you in a way to get out? Maybe not with violence per se, but
no.
Imprisonment or fines, or somebody had mentioned something about having to pay the costs to replace all the trees that were being taken down.
Well, that was one thing that Wolfram and I laughed. I said, as long as you don't throw me under the bus, I won't throw you under the bus. But I said, the 2 of us, we might be cell mates in jail, but sometimes you just got to do what you got to do, right? And so we did what we needed to do. But our meeting wasn't aggressive in any sorts with Pete Lang. It was more of, I guess, you guys aren't leaving, so how can we work together type of a thing. And I had tried to initiate a couple of times up at their command center to try to, like I said, we need to work together if we're gonna beat this thing. The Nadina fire ended up being 87,000 hectares, so it wasn't a small feat to try to stop that fire.
No. And you would think that they would want to make use of every resource they could. That was one of the reasons that they had expressed why they didn't, action it more, was a lack of resources. It seems to me, though, that they did have a resource, several resources. They had your group. Do you think that that the BCWS just does not consider you a resource?
That was what troubled me the most, I think, was that we understand that BCWS was, like I said, there were 600 fires in 2018 burning at the same time. You just can't handle that, and so it was really frustrating for us when we were actioning those fires for 2 weeks before they would even recognize us or even acknowledge that we existed. We'd been fighting for 2 weeks already, fighting a fire that they should have been fighting, that they didn't even, they weren't even there. You could get in a pickup and literally drive right to the fire, and there was nobody there. Like, in my head, it wasn't that, oh, let's go be a bunch of cowboys and fight a fire. It was, these guys are overwhelmed and they need help.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. We stepped into a void and tried to fill that void. But then after we did that, they did nothing but try to cut our knees out from underneath us to get us out of there. They cut off food and any supplies. People were bringing parts and oil and food and water and stuff over in boats across Francois Lake. Francois Lake is huge. It's most places it's a mile or 2 across. It is almost 100 kilometers long, and it's 1,600 feet deep. So this is a substantial lake, and at one time the police had 5 boats on there trying to stop people from bringing food and supplies and things across. And then, of course, we had many people phone us and say, hey, go steal everything out of our garden if you need to, but don't leave. Thanks for doing what you're doing, and keep it up.
Right.
So
yeah, smash into our house and take our furniture for all we care, but don't let it burn down, right?
that's right. Yeah.
No kidding. So, and this was a result of them blocking off or placing a blockade on the ferry terminal. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
So they essentially put you under siege.
They did. I was surprised they didn't try to shut the power off.
Right. They might not have had the authority to do that, or they may have. I'm sure that conversation was had,
or maybe they didn't think of it. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. What was your impression of the BCWS approach to safety?
One of the things that we didn't have, and that worried us, like Wolfram and I talked about this several times, is that we didn't have any first aid attendant or ambulance or anything like that, right? And one time BCWS came in and they brought in a group of 4 to drop some danger trees or something like that, and they came with a first aid attendant, and they were there for only about a day or two, and anytime when you're working with large equipment, you and with personnel, that's always people on the ground. That's always touchy, and you have to move slow and watch out for each other, right?
Yeah.
And you always, when you leave your saws or your gas or whatever, you always tie a ribbon, a bunch of ribbons, and that indicates that there's a cache there, and then you watch out for it. Well, these guys didn't do that, and their chainsaws ended up getting run over by a cat because he was still working in that area, and they just left their stuff there, kind of in the middle of the way.
You're talking about sort of an unwritten best practice that's used by everybody that works in the forest, kind of thing, right? That's the one of the unwritten rules of the forest.
Unwritten rule, yeah. And so that really made them mad, and then they left. And when they left with their first aid attendant.
Mm-hmm. You guys won't be needing this, right?
Exactly. And so, which was frustrating because we had a day shift and a night shift, and we had probably about 20 people on each shift. So through the course of the day, we had about 40 people that were working with us, right?
Right.
On the fire lines.
Right. So the concern at that point isn't primarily your guys' safety, is it? It's making a point. Now, granted, they're not required to supply you with first aid, but it seems to me that if this concern that they had was for your safety, they could at least provide that.
Yeah, like we thought that was pretty, that wasn't a very good show of good faith, that a group of 4 has a first aid attendant and a group of 40 doesn't.
Yeah.
But whatever, like I said, a lot of times we were pretty much on our own most of the time.
What I found with their safety is that it seemed somewhat superficial. I spent some time as a safety professional. I still hold a high regard for safety in its purest form, but there's this kind of a bureaucratic form of safety that to me it just isn't safe at all. This year on the Tremont fire, my partner was told he couldn't carry a chainsaw in the back of the pickup because he couldn't find his chainsaw ticket. But to drive around in the forest without a chainsaw is considerably dangerous. I pretty much, well, especially in a fire like that was prone to turn, and the chances of us having to backtrack into a road that hadn't been driven on for some time was fairly high. So there is a great chance that if we got backed into a corner with this fire and we had to escape, we would have to risk going down one of these roads. And as you probably know, there's not a lot of roads out there that have not been maintained and don't have a tree falling across it. So, just having that chainsaw in the back of the pickup could literally mean life and death. And the chances of that happening were high. So this safety thing with the ticket, it seems that, you're not making me safe.
No. And we had, it was on the Verdun fire, and there's a lady by the name of Pixie, and she went out to check on her sister's house, and drove up behind two crummies or crew cab pickups full of young guys. She's at that time was 72 years old, and they were sitting there. So she got out and walked up to the front of the pickups, and there was a tree laying on the road, and they couldn't get by. And she asked them, "What are you doing?" And they said, "Oh, there's a tree on the road. We can't get by." And she says, "Well, you don't have a chainsaw?" And they were like, "Well, none of us have a chainsaw ticket." And she looked at him, walked back to her pickup, grabbed her chainsaw, and proceeded to cut the tree off the road.
Yeah.
And like I understand that there needs to be safety. Like in our wolf pack, we had a sign in sheet and a sign out. Every shift, the morning shift or the day shift and the night shift, would sign in and sign out. And if somebody didn't sign out, we went and looked for them until we found them and said, "Hey, like, what are you doing?" Or had to drive to their house to see if they had forgot to sign out and they were home sleeping, right? So,
Yeah.
like I understand safety. I've worked in the bush and in sawmills and things most of my life. And so I understand that there needs to be safety, but there needs to be a bit of common sense in the safety. Those two crew cabs of guys, 8 or 10 guys. What they just going to sit there until they burnt or what? Like it just doesn't make sense to me. I guess they had Pulaskis, but none of them were out there chopping the tree to get it removed. They were just sitting there.
Yeah, and to me that seems like a perfect example of the BCWS method. That is the archetype of BCWS response, a policy burden bureaucracy that can't function under its own weight. Peter Lang had claimed he did everything he could to get more resources. They did show up eventually. By the time they got there, what kind of progress had you guys achieved at that point? Were you able to make a difference?
The response that we got from BCWS wasn't much. We got, but they were for us. They were strategic things. We got a skidder with a water tank, and we got a Ponzi with a couple of water tanks. But what that allowed us to do was, instead of playing defense all the time with a fire, that as soon as we had those resources, we could play offense. And so instead of building really big guards that we tried to stop the fire, and made it jump over a 40 or 50 meter wide guard, we started tight guarding, and we were right in the flames with the cats. But you can do that as long as you have a water source to put the cat out. And that's what these water skidders and this forwarder or Ponzi with water tanks on the back allowed us to do. And so as soon as we had that, and then we actually even got a couple of helicopters. And so as soon as we got those things, we went on the offense, and that fire only went, I don't know, maybe 3 more kilometers, and we were able to stop it.
So did they place these skidders under your command? Did they talk to you and say these are yours now, or did they just show up and and go to
Yeah,
work?
pretty much. The skidders and the Ponzi just showed up, and then once they showed up, well, then we just put them to work. We didn't sit around on standby. We didn't just sit around and wonder what we needed to do. We already knew what we needed to do, and we
Right.
just needed certain key things. So if I can give Pete credit for anything, it'd be for that. That's what we asked for, and that's what we got with the two. The water skidder and the two helicopters in the Ponzi, we were able to really attack the fire aggressively.
Right. And so before that time, you guys were doing a more indirect approach. You were getting ahead of it. Say, how far ahead of the front do you think you guys were digging one of these guards? And you're saying this is a wide guard that you're putting out up to
Yeah,
50 meters
yeah,
even.
yeah. It was an extremely wide guard, but we had to make it that wide because if we were a lot of the guard, there was only one way in or one way out. And so if a tree had burnt and fell down, we would still the trees in our area are usually around 30 meters tall.
Mhm.
And so if you're at 40 or 50 meters wide, you are allowed, the tree can fall and you safely access the road and be able to get in and out of the fire guard. So that was the reason why we made such wide guards.
Right. So you're essentially a tree length and a half.
Yeah.
And then having the skidder um,
Yeah.
that allowed you to tight line. So you're right up against the flames. Did that change your your daily schedule then?
Yeah, we made sure that all the guys on the cats were running in the daytime at that time, and then made sure that we would run in the daytime because the guys were on BCWS hours, and so they were only there from be lucky if they showed up at 6 in the morning, and then they were gone by 5 or 6 o'clock at night. And so, we would attack certain things aggressively until about noon, and then we would kind of have to hold off a little bit, and then started in aggressively again after about, I don't know, 5 or 6 o'clock. But then usually they were starting to take off. But if we figured that it was okay and it was safe and we had somebody on a skidder that was the other thing, is the guys that owned the equipment, especially the skidder, we were allowed to throw somebody else on that and follow the cats around.
So these are contractors that you had gotten in touch with, and they felt comfortable with your ability to
These
operate.
these were contractors that were people that lived in our community. So they knew who we were and knew of our abilities, and we'd worked with them before, right? So we all knew each other.
Do you think that they would have let anybody from the BCWS operate their equipment?
That's a tough one. Probably not, because they don't know them, right? Probably, because of a small community, everybody knows everybody, and half the time we've worked together doing something.
I would think that the chances would be relatively slim, right? If you don't know somebody, they're not going to be operating your equipment. I would generally think. I think that it's impressive that they felt that much of comfort with you guys. But how did they get their time signed? I wonder.
I don't know. Maybe they didn't get paid for what we did in the evenings. I don't know. I didn't get paid. I didn't get paid a bunch of weeks that I worked. Like the 2 weeks before Pete Lang showed up, I ate that.
The old BC Wildfire Act left a very vague opening, and it said that anyone who takes the initiative to fight a fire will be compensated, something to that effect. And the new BC Wildfire Act, it says something similar, but it has some verbiage in there that says, essentially only if they were, working within the confines of, the orders given by BCWS. So what do you do if you weren't called by them now? You might not get paid.
Well, this summer, I have a water skidder, and it sat for a week until I got confirmation in writing that BCWS was going to pay for it. And it was a good thing that we had, because they didn't approve it. It took several weeks for them to go through their process, right? And we actually got asked for that paper or that email, and we were able to send it to them. And then they had to, because it came from somebody fairly high up, they had to respect that and pay for when we brought the skidder out. But yeah, people that get burnt and don't get paid for the work they do,
Yeah.
why would they want to work for you again?
It makes it, and word gets around. I know, there's some contractors that really rely on BCWS for the fires, and there's lots of others that just won't even bother.
Yeah, I know lots of guys that won't do a thing until that contract signed. Their equipment sits, and that's extremely frustrating, because it takes a week. Like for that water skidder, it took a week. If that was a fire that was close to a community or houses or whatever, they would have burnt.
Yeah.
Right. You need all of the equipment that you can get your hands on as quickly as you can get your hands on it.
Mm-hmm.
And for them, yes, maybe I should have signed it up earlier or whatever, but the guy who fighting the fire knew that I had it and came and asked me for it. I didn't sign it up.
Right. So he had requested
but he knew
it,
I had
and
he requested it. Yeah.
You would think that this would be an agency. This would be the company that is the gold standard for resource acquisition. And the nature of their business is to respond quickly. And, we have to expect that we're going to have fire seasons that are going to overwhelm them.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that they would be the people that would be, most on top of using or contracting these groups out, to have something set up ahead of time so it's quicker and people can ensure ahead of time that their equipment meets the standards. And let's say it doesn't meet the standards, does everything just burn then? Do we not lower our standards at a certain point if the province is going to burn down? At some point, I would think that we throw everything at it that we can, wouldn't we?
And that was my thought, and that's why we stepped in, was because we knew there was 600 and something fires burning, and we knew they were outgunned, and
yeah,
and that was the simple of it. But usually when you jump in and try to help somebody out, they're grateful, and not kick dirt in your face. But
yeah, it seems a strange way to react to anybody, really, especially when you're in that kind of an official capacity, and you're telling everybody that you don't have any resources, and then these resources get tired of not being called, so they go out and action this fire that you couldn't do, and now you're mad at them. That seems an odd way to react, for sure. How much opposition did you get to your operation? What lengths did BCWS go to stop you from working on this fire?
Basically just tried to, like I said before, they shut the ferry down so that people couldn't so that we couldn't access fuel or whatever, food. They figured they were just going to starve us out, and that we were going to run out of diesel and we wouldn't be able to fight the fire anymore. But we ended up creating some really good relationships with the First Nations, and the First Nations were able to write their own passes to come across because they're their own governing body.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, they were instrumental in us continuing. They brought us over fuel. They brought us over food and supplies. Whatever we needed, they were there. They were 100%.
Yeah. And their community is right there as well. And
you bet, it's all integrated together. We out here, we all live together. It's close to, half and half, native and non-native community. So there's three First Nations bands on that side of the lake. Right. And so you bet they had a lot of assets and a lot of things that they wanted protected from being burnt, and they didn't have the equipment or the things to do it, but we did. but they had access to being able to come across and fuel and whatever we needed. So
Yeah.
they made sure that we could stay there and stay and fight.
Well, that's awesome. How many people live on the south side of Francois Lake?
South side, there must be about I don't know, about 600 people in that neighborhood.
Living in that forest, obviously you have an appreciation for that forest. You have an appreciation for your neighbor's forest. You have an appreciation for, the area around you that you live.
You bet, yeah.
That would give anybody the incentive to really fight this fire. Whereas, if you're in a location that you don't have any ties to, you don't have any relatives there, you've never been there before, you certainly don't live there. I would think that would give a person a lot less incentive to put a fire out. These guys monetarily make more money so long as the fires continue to burn. Do you think that de-incentivizes them from accomplishing what we expect them to accomplish?
Well, when you don't get paid unless it burns, it's not a great incentive to put the fire out, is it? And as for us, we live there. We rely. Most of us are ranchers, and we ranch in the summer, and in the wintertime we feed our cows and we log in the winter. And so those logging jobs is what's paying for the ranch.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, when you see your livelihood going up in smoke compared to you have a government job, your paycheck is always there. Things change. Things are different. You don't want to sit around and just watch what's going to feed your family go up in smoke.
So I noticed that about other resources as well. They weren't as keen, obviously, to hire contractors, and they were quite quick to make a decision to, burn equipment up. There was a low bed that was got itself stuck. Well, there's a group of us that got stuck on the Tremont fire one day, and they wanted to evacuate the area, and rightfully so. But they wanted this low bed operator to abandon his low bed. But that was his livelihood. He was the owner operator. And to them, they're thinking, we'll cut you a check, or we'll make sure that you're reimbursed. You'll get the insurance or whatever it is you're going to get your money back. But when, right? Like I have a job to do with this machine for the next 6 months while I have to fight with you to get paid. So in the meantime, what am I going to do? And to remove from somebody a large portion of their life, that seems pretty easy for them to make that decision.
It is, yeah, because they have no attachment to it, and it doesn't affect them. Like I'm dealing with an insurance company here. I had a tractor burn up this spring, and it's taken till now. So it started in the end of May, and it's the end of September, and I finally got paid out from the insurance company. So if your livelihood, like in your example, relies on that truck, and it takes 3 or 4 months before you can get the insurance money for how you put food on the table, that's not acceptable.
No. When I was contracting, it was often up to 4 months. In the contract itself, it would say that after 30 days of invoicing, you can start to accrue interest. I put that on the invoice. But what they would do is they would wait till the 28th day and then return your invoice and say that we had done it wrong. The date's not supposed to be on the top left, and that's be on the top right, or and it really didn't matter what you would do to correct it. It would just be wrong when they needed it to be wrong, and then they didn't have to pay, any of the
Mm-hmm.
interest. So yeah, we'd
Yeah.
run a fire season and we get paid in December, and and that was pretty hard to do when you would accrue, I don't know, 600, $700,000 in payroll. You know,
Yeah.
I certainly didn't have that in my bank account to just you know to just throw out there. And these guys couldn't afford not to have that check. So what do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they just get to change a number on an invoice and not have to stress about their job. I'd like to know a little bit more about those tactics. So you were right up against the front at that point. Can you kind of tell me how those specific activities played out? You guys would start, say, at what time in the morning, and then you'd meet, I guess, at that time, or would you meet maybe in the evenings?
No, we had a house that was right on the edge of the road. It was actually Wolfram's father and mother's house that he grew up in, kind of, and we would meet there and then meet for uh, 10 minutes because Wolfram would take his guys go down to the west end of the guard, and I would take my guys and I'd go up to the east end of the guard. So we'd kind of collaborate on what we were doing. You know, sometimes BCWS was there, in the later stages of that. And it was usually at like 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. It was usually a 20-minute or a half-hour talk, and then we were gone. And then and at that time, everybody signed in, and then you kind of would all pile back out, and you know, around the same time and sign out. And then the night shift would show up, and they would sign in and sign out, and we would talk. You know, a lot of the times, Wolfram and I were out there almost day and night, and in the critical times because we were or I would be on night shift and he would be on day shift, and we would kind of take care of things that way.
Did you have fire training and experience prior to this?
Um, growing up on a ranch and clearing land and burning piles. A lot of times, if you have a bunch of dirt in your piles and you have stumps down inside the dirt, the fire will go down in there and hide in there. And then in July and August, you get the wind coming from the right spot in the right direction, and it'll light those up again. And then before you know it, you have a fire out in a field or out in a grass fire or something going, right.
For sure.
And the way you grow your farm is you get ag leases, and you log them, and then you clear them, and then you go get another ag lease and you log it and you clear it, and you keep
Mm.
expanding the farm that way. And so, yeah, we probably had two or three, four fires that got away from us, or I attended a fire. I think I was 14 or 15. Down at it was actually Wolfram's place. Their swather, they had a self-propelled swather, caught on fire and lit up the field, and then went into the timber, and we spent a couple weeks putting that fire out. But yeah, there when you grow up in an area like this where you're basically in clearing land and developing it, and you always use fire for everything. And so
Yeah.
obviously nothing's ever 100%, and it gets away, and some of the fires were that had got away on us were big enough that BCWS in the back in the 80s and 90s would have to come help us put the fires out, right. But and the neighbors would show up. We've always had a really strong community that way, that everybody kind of looks out for each other and helps out where they can.
Do you think it's fair to say that you probably worked with fire, every year leading up to that?
You bet. Like, not, I wouldn't say every year, but there was, oh man, every third year, probably we were burning piles and lighting fires and clearing land, and you know I don't know how many sticks and rocks I've picked, but it's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. I grew up in rural BC too, in Clearwater, British Columbia, and fire was it's just it's part of your life. Even in high school, we would get the S100 course. It was pretty hard to find anybody in Clearwater that didn't know at least a little bit about using fire. And so you've structured or helped structure a bit of an organization there, or at least a network of people.
Yeah, we have
Um,
a society. It's called the Chinook Emergency Response Society, and that society um, is founded, you know, really to put out fires in my electoral area. I'm an electoral area director for the regional district of Bulkley and Achako, and my area is Area E. And so we have 9 trailers that are equipped with a 1,000-liter tank and 2 pumps, Pulaski's, 10 lengths of hose, nozzles, everything that you need to fight fire. Um, we have 9 of those stashed out throughout our community, and at all 3 fires, there was at least 2 of those trailers at each one of the fires. So the community response is really good.
and this is coordinated through the regional district. Is that right?
No, it isn't. Not at all. This is something that we've taken on ourselves. Our community has taken on ourselves. The First Nations got behind it. Rio Tinto has assets out here in our area. They have the reservoir and dams and
Hmm.
spillway and things. And so they actually funded and bought all 9 of the trailers. And the Cheslada band actually accessed money and was able to fit all the trailers with pumps and tanks and whatever we need in them. And so it's completely a community run organization.
Have you encountered any resistance to this society or these resources that you have from, say, the BCWS? Have they made any comments, or did you approach them
I
about it?
yeah, I've had several talks with our head guy in town here from BCWS. We have a station here in Burns Lake, um, and just kind of gave him the heads up that we have this society and that we will action fires. And when the fire is within side of the fire department's district,
Mm.
then they take the lead and they tell us where to set up and where to help. If it's outside their fire district and they show up, then we tell them where to set up and where to take, what to do. And I talked to the guy in town here that's BCWS, and I told him that we will action these fires, but when they show up, that they can, you know, we'll we'll assist them.
They assume
They'll
command.
assume command, but we're not leaving until the fire's dealt with. But
Okay.
with all 3 fires that we had this year, BCWS showed up at one. They happened just to be going home from the other fire. It was
Yeah.
later in the evening. It was about 6 o'clock when it was discovered, or 6:30 when it was discovered, and I think they got there about 7 or 7:30, and uh, one of the guys jumped out of the truck. I was there. I didn't see this, but I was told later. He grabbed a Pulaski and went running towards the fire. Got to the fire, looked around, walked back to the truck, threw his Pulaski in the back of the thing. He said, "I've never seen so many people at a fire before in my life." And they got in their truck and went home because they'd worked all day. So that's and we had about, I don't know, about 60 people there at that fire. So
Right. So you had enough resources.
we did, yeah. And we had a cat at that fire, and we were able to loop the fire with the cat. The helicopter was on his way home too, and they spotted the fire, and he came and he could only stay for about a half hour because he was houring out, right? Like they have a limited
Hmm.
time that they can work, and so he stayed and just kind of dropped. We had hoses all around the side and a cat guard all the way around it, but at that time, and he just dumped I don't know, 6 or 8 buckets into the middle and kind of cooled it down, and yeah, we did the rest. We mopped it up and cleaned it up.
Would you recommend to others, to other communities, to other people, that they piece together some kind of an organization that is similar to yours? It seems to me that some people would likely think that that would be irresponsible to encourage others to put themselves at risk doing this kind of a vigilante um, response.
Oh, you know what, Daniel, I don't really give a two hoots. Like I recommend people make their own societies, get education, get some training, and that was one of the things that we told everybody in the wolf pack, was that it's okay. Like one of the things I said all the time, if you can't handle it, that's okay. If it gets too intense, that's okay. Just let us know that you're leaving. Let somebody know that you're leaving, so that we're not looking for you.
So, what happens if BCWS gives you, say, a cease and desist order or tells you to evacuate? How do you think people should respond to that?
A lot of it is, what are your capabilities, and
Mm-hmm.
what are you comfortable with? One of the things, a lot of us ranchers, we're comfortable with fire, and a lot of the logging contractors, we're comfortable working. We know what the limitations to our equipment
Mm-hmm.
are, and we know that we can push and do certain things with that equipment. We have a very good understanding of what our machines can do and what they
Right.
can't do,
And what you can and
and
can't
what we
do.
can and can't do.
Yeah.
But one of the things that really troubled me was, after the fires, there was people that came up to us and said, we're not going to leave the next time this happens. And I'm thinking in the back of my head, you're the type of people that need to leave when something like this happens.
Mm.
And actually,
Mm-hmm.
Mike Farnworth and I had a conversation about that, and I told him, I said, the way that BCWS and the regional district handled things has changed people's thought patterns, or the way they assess things. And now these people think that they can stay behind. And there's some people that can stay behind, and there's a lot of people that can't. And they need to be able to. And this is a hard thing. How do you distinguish who stays and who goes?
Yeah.
Um, but that is just part of the. That's just part of it.
Are you suggesting that that has to be up to the individual to make that decision?
Really, it is up to the individual, and there's certain things that you don't always need people that are, got a Pulaski and running into the
Mm-hmm.
fire. You need people that um cook for these guys. Like we had a cook shack set
Mm.
up, and some of the ladies were cooking, and there were some of the Mennonite ladies that stayed behind, that helped cook and prepare meals, and fed everybody out of their own pockets.
Yeah.
Um,
So it's not always
and
about running into the flames. Oftentimes, there's a lot of logistics going on behind the scenes that are required. These guys need their food. They need.
exactly, they when you there were several days that we put in 18 to 20-hour days, and the last thing that you're going to do is cook for yourself when you get home.
Yeah, really.
Like, we just show up into the cook shack there, and just grab whatever leftovers that was cold. You use half the time we ate it cold and just went to sleep. Like,
Right.
it just
You
so that
need the parts for your dozer when it breaks down. You need there's a lot of other things that you need.
you bet. Actually, one of the guys, he couldn't handle He just like the fire spooked him and he couldn't handle that. But he's an extremely good welder. And when the cats would break down, he'd run in there and weld up whatever we needed to weld, right? And then take off again.
Yeah.
But he was there to help and support. And we needed that. We needed
Yeah.
the guy that show up with an air arc and a diesel a diesel welder, right? To fix whatever we broke. And so there is a large group of people that's needed for anything like that, you know.
And in that case, this guy was able to make his own determination about what he was willing to risk, and
Yeah,
that
what he
and it
what he
worked.
deemed safe.
Yeah. What about the instances where you don't know whether you're safe or not? Say, for example, not having a lookout, not having those eyes in the skies telling you what the behavior is.
Yeah, but we had lookouts. We had a guy or two that would be out there and they'd be on the fire all day long. That was their job. They sat there right beside the fire, or they'd walk out and walk up the hill and make sure that the fire hadn't gone past us up on a ridge somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And they had radios and we had radios, just handheld two-way radios,
Right.
or radios and equipment, radios and pickups. We work and live in the forest, so a lot of
Yeah.
our vehicles and our equipment all have two-way radios in them. And so we kept in constant communication with our lookouts and made sure we knew where the fire was at all times, and
What do
made
you
sure
think the
that
difference is between your operation and the BCWS? It's hard to compare because the resources are so different. But with that, what would you see as significant differences between the way that you operate?
I think the red tape. And Pete Lang told us, he said, you guys do things that we can't, and if you can do things that they can't, and we're less equipped and we're less trained and we're less,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, supervised, I guess, I don't know, how is it that we can do more than you can?
Right. Some would say that you're doing that because you're being unsafe. You're not properly assessing the fire. You're not properly communicating your plans or making plans. It
One of
sounds
the
like that's not necessarily the case.
No, one of the things that I noticed with BCWS, and it stuck out like a sore thumb, was that I knew who was around me, right? I knew I've known them, some of them I've known them my whole life. I know what their capabilities are. I know
Mm.
what they're able to do. Um, BCWS, the night that we lost our guard on August 22nd, and everybody lost their guard in that wind event, I
Mm-hmm.
drove down to Takaisi Lake and watched people's houses burn, and I couldn't believe my eyes that. And then I talked to the resort owner at Takaisi Lake, and they were there, and I talked to him, and she said that they had at least 10 fire trucks with guys from Surrey and Kamloops and Cranbrook and all over Dawson Creek. I can't remember how many different
These are
symbols, and
municipal fire trucks you're
these
talking
are
about,
municipal fire trucks.
right?
And at Takaisi Lake Resort, there's a community there, right? And I think 3 houses burnt there that night. They were commanded to leave. So these are people that have been trained to run into burning buildings and
Mm-hmm.
to be able to rescue people. They have oxygen with masks. They have, they're better equipped than anybody out on that fire, and they
Mm-hmm.
were commanded to leave, and because they left, those houses burnt. The resort owner and his wife they left, and they said, well, what are we doing? We got to go back. They panicked for a second, and then they realized what had happened, and they went back, and you could literally see from behind their store, like where the fire was coming up, everything was black except for where he could reach with the hose. So there was a round line in the back where He was standing there with one hose defending his
Hmm.
resort. And I just shake my head. And the only thing that I could come up with is that they don't know or they don't trust the training that these firefighters had. And they were better trained. Like, these guys are from, some of them were from big cities. That's all they did was fight fires in buildings, and probably way better trained than most of any of BCWS's, grunts that they have on the ground, right? Their initial attack crews. But yet, why were they pulled out?
Yeah,
You know,
especially when you could see the difference that their hose work made. They certainly would have made a difference in that case.
100%. Yeah. Three houses and 40 men to fight it. It's a no-brainer. They wouldn't have lost any houses if they would have allowed them to stay.
It seems to me, and maybe I'm speaking out of turn here, which happens, but it seems to me that if these houses were to burn, there really isn't a negative a consequence that's going to happen to the Peter Langs or to the rest of BCWS. In fact, really, if you think about it, the more houses that burn down, when Lytton burns down, or Kelowna or Barrier, um, that's when they get the most pats on the back. That's when people are most likely, to cheer the firefighters on. That's when they get their cape, and this image of these heroes crawl out when these fires get out of control. Not when they put them out. When they put them out, we don't hear about them. And I wonder if that doesn't incentivize the wrong thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I can't speak to that too much because like we didn't really have anything to do with BCWS until after those houses burnt and after that wind event on August 22nd. So
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm not sure. I don't know if maybe there is something that is built into their contract, some kind of a reward or bonus or whatever it is. I'm not sure how they would do that. I'd be interested to find out. But it's always been a bit of a pet project of my own to try to search out what are the underlying causes. Because it seems to me if we are going to make any difference, if we're going to improve matters, we have to look at what we're incentivizing, or at
unfortunately,
least that's
yeah,
my thoughts.
unfortunately, me being in government, I see it also. If you don't use the money that they send you, well, next year you don't get as much. And that's an unfortunate thing from the province because if you'd had it set up so that they got $100 million each year, and if they didn't use it all, and they would hopefully store it up, right, and save it for a rainy day, so that when you know 5 years goes down the road, maybe they have 200 million stored up, and you know you have a bad fire season, and you use up that 200 million and use up a couple hundred more from the province. It all comes from the same spot. So I don't know why it why they act like that. I don't know.
I think that they, as an organization, have evolved to react in a way that is going to work to work for them. I'm sure. I suppose that's what I would do if I was incentivized that way. Going back to what you had mentioned about using the funds that were left over, they could use that for mitigation efforts. We could see a lot of these projects that people are talking about for fire smarting, and yeah, maybe somebody needs to answer that call when those funds go over. Um, in the view of politics that you have, I imagine there's some accountability with the way that you use the funds that you're allotted.
You bet. You have to realize that any money that I receive to do anything with is from somebody else's pocket. And so you need to treat it that way, right? Like you need to be able to justify where those funds go and why you used them. Because, my neighbors, they'll phone me up and ask me, why did you spend money here? And why did you do this? And so you need to be able to justify why you spent their money on this project or on that project. And so,
You're going to see them in the grocery
that's right.
store.
I bump into them or, I see them on the ferry or the grocery store. You bet.
Who could do a better job of initial attack than the people that are closest to it? Like,
yeah,
I'm hearing these stories that only, BCWS initial attack crews can do initial attack.
The last fire was a fire that was started by a tractor, and it was in about the first or second week in September. And the tractor started on fire, started the windrows that he was raking on fire, then bales started on fire, and windrows on the ground were burning. And I phoned BCWS here in Burns Lake, and they said, we don't have anybody. They've all been disbanded. They've all gone back to school. He said the closest crew that we have is in Houston. And Houston is over 2 hours away from the south side of Francois Lake. And if we had sat around and waited for 2 hours for a BCWS crew to come, it would have been way larger than 2.5 hectares. And it was close proximity to houses. And, like that was our first concern. When I got there, our first concern was we started putting out the fire that was creeping towards the house and the grass. And then to flank it on the sides where it was going to go into the trees. And by that time, then more and more people kept showing up, and we were able to put the fire out.
It seems like a bit of a no-brainer then that the people that are closest to it should be the first on it. I share your puzzlement on that.
I think and I'm going to talk to the head guy here at BCWS in Burns Lake, and I'm going to talk to him and see if we can't either get an initial attack crew stationed on the south side or get the locals trained up to a point where he has confidence in us and a confidence in our ability. That confidence and that, I don't know if it's a realization maybe of that. Yes, we can fight fire, and yes, we do put fires out, and we are very capable of that task. That he will maybe have a little more confidence in us, and maybe, I would love to have some agreement with him where we get funded a little bit from BCWS for actioning their fires. So hopefully that we can work something out.
What do you think prevents them from using the resources that you guys had? What, whether it be a policy or, lack of training?
It's probably several things. Probably policy is one. Their whole safety regime, their whole, you're not trained well enough to do it. I don't know. I think it's several different things that pile up in that pile. Even a lack of just wanting to, I don't know, even just acknowledging that somebody other than them can fight fire.
Well, I get the sense that is the issue, that there are people with the authority to make these decisions, and those people know that meeting up with individuals like you hasn't always made them look very good. And it's in their best interest that that happens less and less. At least that's my impression.
Yeah, but what's frustrating is it's in everybody's interest to put the fire out as quick as possible. And so
Except
even
theirs.
if yeah, well, even if they don't think that we're trained or whatever it is, our end goal is the same, that we get the fire out. I hope that's their
Well,
end goal.
it's their clearly stated mandate. I looked that up today.
One of the other big things that we noticed was that the guys that actually had the boots on the ground weren't making the decisions, and the guys that aren't there, that didn't get dirty, are the ones making the decisions. And so you have a big disconnect. You're being told to do something. Fire can change extremely quickly, and you're being told to do something that makes now, a half hour later, doesn't make any sense to be doing, and you need to be either getting out of there, or you need to be doing something completely different than what you've been told to do. But because of the chain of command, and because if you screw up and you don't do what you're told, you'll never be brought back on a fire again. And I heard that from several of the red shirts that were on the ground. Oh, we can't do anything until we get it from the top, or else we're done. We won't be able to. We will be done.
Yeah, I don't know
We'll
how
be booted
many.
out, and
I don't know how many
we won't
times
come back.
I was told that they had to, run a decision by their higher ups, and that never saw them again for 2 or 3 hours as they went through a series of meetings.
So there needs to be an allowance or an adjustment there. The guys on the ground have got to be able to make calls and got to be able to make decisions without running it past somebody that might fly by in the next 2 hours in a helicopter.
Yeah.
Right? Like they've got to be able to have trust in the training that the guy has on the ground, and be able to allow him to trust in his own training and to be able to make a decision.
Right. And that person,
and if it's the wrong decision, and sometimes you can make a decision and it's not quite right, or not quite this, or wasn't quite what the incident commander had in mind, but it still got the job done. Then why would you penalize them, or why would you, that's how you learn. Like the first time I ever fought fire, I wasn't perfect at it, and you learn by experience, and you learn by doing. You don't learn by just taking commands from somebody and without thinking and without doing any of that.
yeah,
It's just,
when every decision that you make is pre-made for you in a set of policies. And, if it's not in the book, then you can't do it. That's not, they need that failure. We need that failure. We need to experience when things go wrong so we know why it's wrong. Otherwise it's always still an option, right? And
that's right.
And I agree with you. A lot of the training that they get is specifically designed to help them make those decisions. So if they're not making the decisions, then why even bother to train them that way? And if that's the training that they're saying separates, the locals from, their professional force, then, well, that doesn't make sense either, because just because they got the training doesn't mean that they can use that training, whereas you guys can.
Yeah, they were scared to use their training because, like I said, if they screwed up, they were gone. Right? Instead of, if they screwed up, you're like, okay, what was it that happened? What made you think of this? What like, do an analysis on it.
Yeah, post-mortem on the decision on the fire.
Exactly. Say, okay, what happened here? Why did you do this? Or what led you to make you to do this? Or what happened? And then work through it and train these guys so that, it's just like these incident commanders are these elite guys that, there's 10 in the province. Well, why don't we, if you're a good leader, you train the people underneath you to be able to take your position if you're not there.
The best leaders make other leaders.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And their organization is not set up that way.
No, it isn't, because they don't trust in your qualifications or ability. They don't trust, their own boots on the ground, their training and their ability. They they seem to trust themselves as an organization well. It's odd to me that going into this season, into 2021, that despite knowing that there is a dramatic shortfall in resources that were available to them, they didn't reach out to more than their industry partners.
Yeah, they didn't phone the wolf pack,
or I'm sure any other contractor. Yeah, and I'm sure they know where you are and how to reach you.
Pete Lang does. Yeah,
just howl at the moon. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Clint. It was an honor. I'm so glad that you were able to make the time for this. I think that this is important to talk about. I think that it's something that everybody in BC needs to hear. And yourself or any members of the Wolfpack are welcome to come back whenever you can.
All right.
Thanks again.
You bet. Have a good one.